Hey everyone, hope everyone's doing well. So, this is going to be part 3 to helping answer the 10 mark questions, specifically the outline and explain type of questions. Just as a recap, video 1, we looked at the differences between the 10 mark question types. So, if you watch the video, you will know that we have a 10 mark question with an item and a 10 mark question without an item. This video series is looking at the 10 mark questions without the item, which also follows the outline and explain, and then whatever the question happens to be. And in video 2, we looked at decoding the question. So what the question is asking us to do and how we look at how one thing can affect another. So in this example, the question that we were using is outline and explain 2 reasons why consumption may be affected by social class. So then we turn that around to say, well, how can social class potentially affect consumption? Okay. If you've already watched those videos and maybe you want a recap, please feel free to come off this one and go and have a look at previous ones. If you've not seen the other videos and you feel like it's something you want to just brush up on, then again, please feel free to go to those. If you are comfortable and confident with those 2 topics, then obviously please carry on watching this one. And what we're actually going to be doing in this video, you can probably see in the title, but the objectives. We need to begin mind mapping potential ideas. So we've looked at the question, we have a question in mind. We looked at what the question is asking us to do, but we've still got a long way to go until we actually have an answer in front of us. And the first place I would suggest students start is by mind mapping their potential ideas in relation to the question. We can do that together. And then afterwards, we need to look at exploring the similarities and differences between potential answers. I'll explain this in more detail later on, but essentially, when we mind map ideas, sometimes there'll be answers that we put down that will be very unique and will stand out amongst the rest. And then there may be some points that kind of fall into the same category of topic. And it's important that we keep that in mind when we're talking about outline and explain 2 points. Those 2 points do need to be different, and it's potentially a problem for students when they write 2 paragraphs and it's essentially the same thing. So that's why we're going to be doing that in the second part. So what you'll need for this, a selected 10 mark non-item question, so the outline and explain 2 and then whatever. You can use this one. I would encourage students who maybe want a bit more support and guidance to use this one. The question I have outlined here. Let me just highlight that for the sake of clarity. It's more than adequate to use this question if you haven't found one already. If you're feeling more confident and you want to try a different topic, then please feel free. You can exchange the questions, it's not a problem. You also need to have knowledge of what the topic and focus is of the question, so essentially how it affects B. So the topic in this one is consumption, and then the focus is social class, because social class is affecting the type of consumption we have. But we need to have the knowledge of the topic. We need to know what consumption is, but then the focus is going to be social class and the differences there. So if you have those 2 things, if you have the knowledge and the question, you are more than welcome to continue following this video and this guidance. But before we actually start the mind mapping process, before we start talking about it, there's a few things I felt like I needed to point out. So any points, and this might seem obvious, but any points that you write down or eventually use to answer the question, they must link to the question. This is particularly important because the 10 marks are designed for you to combine 2 different elements of your sociological knowledge that you may not have done before in your standard, in certain other questions, or if you're doing like recaps or something. You're bringing 2 points that may or may not have crossed paths before. So it's very easy to kind of forget what you're trying to answer. If we're looking at the second point here, so choosing the right points requires sustainability and knowledge. So it's a balancing act, essentially. When we're talking about knowledge, it's what you know. So you need to have a certain amount of knowledge to even answer the question. That's a given. But you also need to be aware of the suitability of the things that you're talking about. The 10-mark questions are designed in such a way that they require the student to be very picky about what they're going to talk about. You know, you only have 15 minutes or so to actually write the answer. You don't have 2 hours, 3 hours to actually write everything you know. Therefore, you have to be selective. You need to be able to balance what you know in your knowledge or what you have available to you, and does this answer the question in mind? Okay? Another really important point here is more points are not better. And what I mean by that is you'll understand that outline and explain 2 reasons. If you start writing more than 2, that's not going to get you any more marks. I believe what the examiners will actually do in that scenario is pick the best 2. Doesn't mean that you can offset a lack of knowledge by going wider in the topics you're talking about. You need to pick 2, you need to stick to 2. If some points overlap, then that's one thing. But if you think, I'm going to talk about 4 smaller things to get the marks, no, it doesn't work that way. And then the point here, 2 distinct points helps minimize answer repetition. So I talked about this a couple of minutes ago. If you have 2 very similar points, it's very easy for them to bleed into each other and just become one big point in 2 separate paragraphs. That's not what you're being marked on. You need to have 2 separate points. And if you're able to pick 2 points that are very different, then that's going to help minimize that potential risk. And then finally, in terms of this video and the ones going forward, I'm going to encourage you to pace yourself depending on how confident you are in your abilities right now. So use your notes resources as much or as little as you need. This is not the exam. This is also not a timed assessment. This is you independently working, using these videos as resources for you. You can have all the textbooks and all the notes you want in front of you if you feel like you need it. You could decide, I'm going to minimize that. I'm not going to have anything in front of me. I want this to be a test as to what I know currently. Or you can do mix and match. It's completely up to you, right? I guess that also links to the point that a lot of the practice that we do here, you can't do that in the exam because there's no time. So what this is, it's an opportunity for you to become comfortable in the process, in the thought process. Okay, so the actual process of doing a mind map is going to depend entirely on what your question is. If you're doing a different question to the one that we've got in the video here, then any points that I bring up are not going to be particularly helpful, unless it's a very similar question, of course. If you are feeling confident and you are using this question and you want to try and do the mind map process yourself, obviously you can pause this at this moment. You can come back to it. So what we have here is our prompting question. So how might social class affect consumption? It's a very wide topic. There's lots of points to make. My invitation to you is for you to just start writing down thoughts that come to mind. We are not answering the question here. We're just raising some points. We're essentially dumping all of our thoughts onto this page. And there's going to be points that I make that you might not fully agree with. And there's going to be points that I haven't put down here that you may want to. There's a certain level of subjectivity to it. But we'll make a start. So, the first thing I would suggest is just really breaking down this question in front of us. So, how might social class affect consumption? Well, we know with social class there's going to be different types. We'll need to keep that in mind for later on. And then when we're talking about consumption, you need to be completely familiar with what consumption is. Okay? So if that's something that you aren't comfortable with right now, pause the video, go and have a look. Okay? Go through your notes, and then come back. So I'm just going to, it's very off the cuff kind of thing. So the first thing that comes to mind for me, the most obvious answer for me personally, is financial differences. Financial. Okay. Now, I'm not going to go into why I think there's too much right now. That's going to be for a different video, but that's something that comes to mind straight away. What else might come to mind? Well, what about work commitments? And time. Well, I know that when we're talking about social class, one other concept that comes to mind to me is cultural capital. See, what I'm not doing here is sitting here and thinking, I need to justify why I'm writing this. That's going to come later. Sometimes we can overanalyze things and not get anything done. Sometimes making the start is the hardest bit. And if we're going on the thought of cultural capital and the idea of culture, what about the different types of culture? So what about high culture? And mass culture? Conspicuous consumption is a key term that's stuck in my mind. So we're going to get it down on here. What about expectations? Expectations of social class? Taste and identity? Let's think one more. Oh, don't know what happened there. We could talk about leisure choices. Okay. There's going to be more points than that. But what we were doing there is any words that just came to mind or any topics that came to mind, we just put them down here. So now we can't forget the points. And you'll know that we need to pick two. So you can very clearly see that everyone's 10-mark answer is going to be different. It's going to be unique. There's going to be a blend of different topics. Okay? This is a very it can be a tricky process if you've not done this before, especially if you're not too confident in the points that you're raising. My advice to you would be anything that comes to mind for your related question, write it down, and if it's not correct, we don't have to use it. We don't have to use it in the exam. This is about removing those barriers to yourself and not having the confidence to say, oh, it could be this, right? We need to remove that. And the best way to do that is to just do the mind map and then reduce points if necessary. Okay, so I would suggest that you don't move on from the video until you've done your mind map, right? Or at least watch until the end and then do your mind map. Don't continue the video series until you've got a mind map of some sort. The second part to this, and this is very subjective, and it's going to depend highly on the question you have, is the idea of categories and the topics that you've got down on your mind map. So this is going to be very hard for me to do in the video format. So my suggestion would be, if there's any doubts about the category section, please do reach out. But the way I'll try and explain it is this. We want 2 distinct points. Therefore, we need to find 2 points potentially out of all of these that we've got. And we need to be knowledgeable on them. They need to be suitable for the question. But we also want them to be different enough so we're not repeating ourselves. And a really good way of trying to prevent that from happening is categorizing points depending on how you've put them down on here in the first place. So I've got a bit of an example here. So to me, when I'm looking at these points, there's 2 main categories that come up to me. There's the idea of culture. So culture comes up quite a bit. So that's 1. So if we were to put here, cultural capital, and then high mass culture. So it's a very simple table, and you can see the categories I've got here. We've got culture, income differences, and both. And then if we were to take, I only have 1 highlighter. Anyway, I'll just do it in red. So 2 that also stand out to me here is something beyond culture and the income differences. So financial differences is 1. Work commitments and time is another. Please excuse my terrible highlighting substitute there, but we work with what we've got. So you might put work commitments here. Okay. As an example. So the reason why I'm showing you this is if you were to make a decision in the exam, you know that there is a stark difference between high and mass culture and work commitments. They're not the same point. They might be similar to some degree because we're talking about them in the same question, but one is based on the culture and one is based on a financial need. Now, if you were to also write financial differences here, it might be difficult for you to really separate the points of work commitments and financial differences. We understand that to answer the question, we need to outline and explain 2 points. if your 2 points, if point number 1 was work commitments and the other point was financial differences, there might be some overlap there, or more overlap than there would be if you had picked financial differences and cultural capital to help explain the differences in consumption. I appreciate it's maybe not the easiest thing to follow. So again, if you have any questions, please do reach out. Or if you're doing your own question and you're having difficulties distinguishing the differences between the points you've, put down in your mind map, please do reach out. It's not something you have to just do completely independently. The support is there. There'll be some topic points that you could count as both, depending on how you want to go into it. For example, conspicuous consumption. You could make the argument that would fall under either. And if it can fall under either of them, then you know that there's a degree of subjectivity, and what matters is your ability to display your subject knowledge, so your AO1, and then being able to apply it. There's more to it than this, and we'll cover that in the next video, but this is a really good start. So what I would suggest is, for you, before you move on to the next video, if you've watched this one, really go into this and complete as much as you can. So make that mind map, do as much as you can with that mind map, and then begin to try and categorize a few points. The mind map is more important. The categorization is something that's very subjective, but you just want to look for points that are not too similar. Okay. If there's any questions you have, please, like I've said, please do let us know. This is not an easy process, I understand that, but if you're able to engage with this to the fullest extent possible, feel confident in the potential answers you've got, you'll be much better off for the next video in the series. Okay? All right. Take care.